We've seen in Galatians how Christ Jesus blesses us when we come to Him. With, in chapter 1, salvation or rescue. With, in chapter 2, justification or being right with God. With, in chapter 3, redemption or being released from the curse of the law, the condemnation of the law. And now, end of chapter 3, beginning of 4, the best thing of all, the highest privilege of being a Christian, what is it? It's being adopted into God's family. There's nothing better. It's wonderful to be saved. It's wonderful to be justified, redeemed from the curse of the law, but best of all, the highest blessing we receive as Christians is to be adopted into God's family. Suppose you are a convicted serial killer sitting on death row, awaiting execution, guilty of every charge for which you have been imprisoned. One day the prison warden comes to your cell door and announces that you have been fully pardoned. You are now free. But then the warden tells you that the governor who pardoned you has also adopted you. You are to go and live in his home. You are to take his family name, and you are to become heir to his estate. That's essentially what God has done for us in adoption, and it's an astonishing truth. J.I. Packer wrote that adoption is the highest privilege that the gospel offers, higher even than justification. To be right with God the judge is a great thing, but to be loved and cared for by God the Father is even greater. But I wonder what you think of when you think of the word, or when you hear the word adoption. I wonder if there's some negativity in your mind. When we think of adoption in our situation here, we can have a negative image of a child who wasn't wanted, at least in the first place, who was less loved, and maybe who settles into a family in a kind of a second-class status. But in the ancient world, in ancient Rome, in the times when this was written, that wasn't the view of adoption at all. In fact, I've discovered that adoption in those days was actually better in some ways than being a natural son or daughter. It had a powerful meaning. When a child was born naturally, the parents had the option in ancient Rome of disowning the child for a variety of reasons. It might shock you, but it was not considered a bad thing in the Roman Empire. If you had a child that you didn't want, perhaps a handicapped child, perhaps even a girl, the baby could just be left to die. A shocking reality of pre-Christian values, morals. Christianity has transformed, revolutionized the world in that respect. And so the relationship with the natural-born child was not considered to be permanent necessarily if it wasn't desired. But if a child was adopted rather than being natural born, that meant that the child had been freely chosen by the parents and was wanted, was desired by the parents, and that child would then be a permanent part of the new family. Parents who adopted in the Roman Empire could not disown that child. It was a permanent arrangement. That adopted child received a new identity with new rights and new responsibilities. Any previous commitments or responsibilities or even debts were wiped out by that new adoption. Being adopted made all the difference. You can imagine the life of a slave in ancient Rome being taken into the family of some rich or influential person. His life was revolutionized, transformed overnight. And an adopted child was, in some senses, more wanted and more loved. So we shouldn't have our 21st century glasses on when we're thinking about adoption. In those days, adoption was a wonderful affirmation of love and of being wanted. And it is surely the highest privilege for a Christian